Hello, wherever you are in the country, whether it is AM or PM, my name is Colin Gibson. I am part of the safety and field support team at Master Electricians. Welcome to our first safety-focused webinar, which is going to look at safe work method statements today. We've a lot to cover, and if at the end of this session you need further clarification, help, assistance, please, there will be a Q&A session at the end, or you can call your safety team on 1300 889 198, and I'll throw those details up as get towards the presentation today. I keep going to say afternoon because, of course, it is here in Queensland, but for our friends in the more western states, it's still morning. So it's without too much padding and ado, let's go for it. So what are we going to cover? Well, we're going to talk about what is a safe work method statement of SWMS, whether they've got any legal standing, what should be in them, and where do I find them? So it should be fairly straightforward from there. Purpose of the SWMS. Essentially, we can cut through a lot of legal speak around out there. What are they there for? They are to help everyone understand the requirements to carry out work in a safe and healthy manner. These things, early versions, I remember seeing them as an apprentice in the 1980s. Over the years, they have been known by many, many terms, including job safety analysis, that's where JSAs came from, task-specific risk assessments, safe work procedures, SWPs. There's a raft of other names that are out there and acronyms, but modern language is they are a safe work method statement, or a SWMS. Are they mandatory? Well, each state and territory requires SWMS when completing high-risk construction work. What is high-risk construction work? We'll cover that in just a few moments. All right, the high-risk construction tasks are designated in each jurisdiction's health and safety regulations. With somebody's got their mic on there, by the way. If you can mute your mics if you've got the opportunity, much appreciated. Each state and territory has in its legislation tasks, it's what it says, a high-risk construction work or high-risk construction activities, and lays them out. But you can have SWMS for any task that you have a risk assessment identified as being necessary. Okay. We recommend, however, that as much as possible, minimise the number of SWMS you have for the reasons that we'll go into in this presentation. If you can put it into a procedure, great. But if you do need a SWMS for something outside of the mandatory task, that's absolutely fine as well. All right. So what are high-risk construction work tasks? Legislation across the country generally identifies 18 high-risk construction work tasks. Some of those are of no relevance to the general electrical contractor. Okay, I'll give you examples. There's probably not too many contractors running around putting explosives in the ground to dig trenches for cables, and there's probably not a lot of contractors around doing commercial diving to lay cables. All right, diving, explosives are just some of the number of high-risk construction work tasks that's probably not going to be terribly relevant to the contractors. So we'll just mention the ones that are. Okay, so common tasks relevant to electrical contractors. Well, there they are on screen. You know, the ones we probably all played with at some stage: asbestos, confined space, demolition, excavation, hazardous substances. Plant, when we talk about plant, we're talking both fixed and mobile plant, so it might be cranes and forklifts, but it might be some U-boot machine that you've got for fabricating something in the workshop. Heights, working on or near overhead power lines, working on or near a road, working on or near energised electrical equipment. Now, how the regulators look at and apply these in the different states and territories varies as widely as the number of jurisdictions we've got. For example, in Queensland, the Electrical Safety Office, the ESO, who's the regulator for the electrical, their inspectors focus just on the two electrical ones, the overhead power lines and energised electrical equipment, and they tend to leave the rest of those for the Work Health Safety Queensland. And yet in other states, it's the regulator who applies the whole lot, covers a lot across the board. So how they look at it, how they're applied, or indeed who applies them, comes down to the difference with those jurisdictions. How do SWMS ensure safety? Well, there's a big picture look, right? They set out the work activities, they identify the hazards, describe the control measures. You can combine a number of tasks together in one SWM. So before I had a list of the activities, say confined spaces and asbestos and working at heights. If I was working at heights in a confined space with asbestos, I might decide instead of having 3 separate SWMs, I'll combine them into one and run with it that way, and that's okay. Or I might just decide to leave them as 3 separate SWMs because that's going to be practical for the order and, of the job and how it's going to run. You have options here, right? The key thing is must be practical, usable and available for all. You can combine your SWMs with another business for a joint SWMs if the nature of the job is such. So you've got a subcontractor arrives on site to assist you with the task. You might have a look at their SWMs, you might have a look at yours, decide which is the most appropriate, all combine and then run from there. That might be very appropriate where you have a crane turning up on site and a crane operator and you're doing some task maybe near overhead lines, so you go, right, we've got one that's working near overhead lines, you've got one for plant, and we've got one for heights, and let's just combine them so away we can go and get it done safely. How do SWMs do this? Well, more specifically, they describe the activity task being undertaken. They identify the resources that are needed, they assess and identify appropriate control measures, and systematically plan the activity so it can be completed safely. So remember that your SWMS is a safety document. It's not a blow-by-blow how to do document. It's not going to tell you how much tension to put on a nut unless that nut had a specific safety purpose and focus to it, all right? Remember also when you're designing your controls, the hierarchy of control. So the best thing you can do is, if possible, is eliminate the hazard. Hey, we've done away with it, it just doesn't exist here anymore. Or substitute or isolate engineering controls, administrative controls, and PPE. PPE is the last level of control. It's the least desirable. Sadly, in many ways, it's the first one that organisations go for, all right? But you list out the job in a systematic way, identify the hazards, identify the controls, keeping in mind that hierarchy of control. What must a SWMS identify? Identifies the actual task that is high-risk construction work. So if you've got, let's say I was putting up lighting poles, and I've got a SWMS for doing this. That job might involve working on or near a road. It might involve using plant. It might involve live electrical, or a combination of those. If I have a SWMS to do this, say putting up a lighting pole, then where I have a high-risk construction activity in that, the SWMS must indicate that that is a high-risk construction activity. So my SWMS might tell me the safe way of assembling the pole on the ground. That's not a high-risk construction work task. It might tell me how, I might have a point to sling the load for lifting. Now maybe I've got some high-risk construction work working around plant. If it is beside a road, I will need to identify that it's beside a road. But if it's in totally just a job yard there where I can close it off and we're not near a road, then obviously I'm not going to flag that. So just take the principle that I've got to identify on my swims the tasks that are actually high risk construction work. State the hazards relating to the task and health and safety risks associated with those. Identify the control measures, remembering that hierarchy of control we talked about, and describe how the control measures are to be implemented, monitored, and reviewed. That's a statutory requirement of that last piece. So you don't just create the swims, implement the controls, and away you go. If this is going to go on for a period of time, you do need to have something that comes back on a regular basis and says, hey, are these controls A, still in place, B, still appropriate? Is there something else I need to do? Has something happened? But that might be that I'm working on overhead power lines, and every so often I've got to stop and go, hey, let's have a look around the horizon, or let's check Bureau of Meteorology's websites. There are thunderstorms in the area, because that's likely to upset the work. What must a SWMS address? Well, circumstances that may affect how the work is carried out. As I say, in the example I just used about overhead power lines and the weather. If the work is in connection with a construction project, a work health safety management plan, it's poorly worded on that, I apologise, has been prepared. So you would have been asked, no doubt, if you work for a principal contractor, for your work health safety management plan. And what's that about? Well, that's about the principal contractor making sure that a management plan has been put together, it's effective for the work with the construction project. Your swims must be readily accessible and understandable to the people that use it. So, now, it might be electronic, it might be physical. Either way is perfectly acceptable as long as it is readily accessible. When I say understandable, it must be in language that is appropriate for the people using it. So it's all right with a SWMS to use industry terminology and abbreviations, as long as they're clear and understandable to the people that are using the SWMS. But it's no point just having it all in English if you had a large workforce of foreign nationals whose mother tongue or fluency with English isn't great. Their mother tongue is another language. I might have to have a version of the SWMS available in a language that they understand. I need to be really careful here, though. I need to make sure that both versions are exactly the same. All right, but you do have to take into account, right, the people who are using the SWMS ability to understand it. Construction industry worldwide has got poor literacy skills overall, so throwing a huge technical document at them, probably not going to be terribly effective all the time. What else do I need to consider? Well, emergencies are a big one. What could go wrong, and what am I going to do about this? So if you've got a height SWMS where you might be looking at fall arrest devices, you must consider, okay, if somebody does go over the edge and is hanging from this fall arrest device, how am I going to effectively rescue them or call for assistance? That should be addressed in the SWMS as well, so that if it goes down that path, people know what to do, how to do it, who to contact. There should be clear expectations for workers. Indeed, should be clear expectations for anyone in the environment of the SWMS. SWMS do apply to the principal contractor, the subcontractors, the workers, visitors, passers-by to the workplace. Workers must be consulted in the development of a SWMS, and in most jurisdictions there are infringements for not consulting with the workers in the development of a SWMS. Now, how much do I consult? Well, if I had a workforce of, say, 100 electricians, I wouldn't need to sit down with all 100 of them and try and get a group consensus on a SWMS. I could identify core people with the relevant skills and pull together a small group and consult with them, a representative sample. If I'm a contractor of, say, 5 employees, I might go, it's fairly easy to sit down at a safety meeting and have the discussion with everyone and consult with the whole lot. But I must consult with the workers in development of the SWMS. I must train my workers in the requirement of the SWMS. Now, not all workers need to be trained, only those who are likely to use the SWMS. Okay. And I would suggest you collect evidence of both consultation and training. So what I suggest to companies when I'm out there visiting is, if you're using an MEA SWMS, is grab a physical copy, write consultation copy on the front page, sit down with the staff and a bunch of crayons and pencils, draw all over it, comment on it, tick boxes if you're happy, reword it if you're not, because the SWMS are just templates, they're places to start from. But keep a consultation copy, get the consultation group to sign off on it, and I generally suggest scan that and file it away as some evidence. All right, same as when you're training workers on your SWMS, probably at a safety meeting, make sure that you get evidence that they were there, that they understood, keep those records, scan it, file it away. Common SWMS mistakes, right? By far, people making them way too complicated. All right, keep it simple if possible. The more involved a SWMS is, the more likely it is that something will get overlooked, something will go wrong. All right. Not reviewing generic SWMS to be your own. A common one that we find with our members is a phone us up, so-and-so has rejected our SWMS, or they've thrown it in front of the inspector who's rejected it, and I don't know why, and you say, show it to us, and it's got the template there which says insert company name and address and ABN and all those details, and it just screams that somebody's printed off, haven't had a look at it, and away they go. All right. Not consulting workers is another common one. I've touched on that with the infringements that exist out there for not consulting. Failing to review before using on a task. So you've got your SWMS, you've developed it back in the office, the staff have all had a look during their safety meeting and go, we think this is good, we've done a great job, you've trained your staff on it. But when you go out onto site and you actually need to use it, you need to have a look at the SWMS again and have a look at the environment that you are in and go, is this still appropriate? If I was working off of ladders and there was bobcats and diggers running around the site, I might go, do you know what? I don't think a ladder is an appropriate way to get up to the outside of the building because these clowns over here might just knock it over. Right? You've got to have a look at the things that are going on. All right? That might be the layout of the ground. We're stuck on the side of a hill and putting up a ladder, probably not going to be terribly good and safe. We might have to use something else. It might be the weather, it might be noise, a whole raft of things. So failing to review before using on a task. A big one that people do get in trouble with as well, not working to your SWMS. So you've got a safe work method statement, staff are out there on the job and they've just chosen to ignore it. And I've seen a number of infringements across the country for exactly this thing, where the company has had the SWMS out there, put it out there, the employees ignored it, and then suddenly everyone's in a whole pile of pain and trouble. Layout format. There is no specific layout or format designated. There is a vast array of formats out there. Whatever format you use, it doesn't matter as long as you've got the key mandated information there. And I would suggest keep it consistent across all your SWMS. I've seen examples where people have sent us 3 or 4 SWMS that have been rejected by a principal contractor. You open them up and I've got 3 or 4 totally different formats because they got one from an organisation over here, another one from an organisation over there, and an employee walked through the door with somebody pinched from somewhere else. right? Keep them consistent, right? They must contain the mandated information, and we'll cover that in just a moment. They must be relevant and usable for your workers and others, all right? And that includes, right, visitors to the site, subcontractors, and so on. Master Electricians uses a standard template. We review the content annually. So we've just decided on a template that we think works fairly well. We do jig that around. We review the templates once a year. All right, it is a big job, we understand. This is why I encourage companies to get the number of SWMS they've got to a minimum, because we know the size and the challenge of reviewing these things on an annual basis. So let's have a look at a SWMS. For the next few slides, I've simply taken a version of our working at height SWMS for the rest devices. And I'm not going to go through every page of it, but I've marked up some key features and that for you. The yellow highlighted information is the mandatory parts of the SWMS. So I'll run my cursor over the screen. It's a high-risk activity, identifying that it's working at heights. The for the rest devices, that's not actually mandatory. The mandatory part is the working at heights, but we've given this one a name because we've got a whole range of these things. Company's name, the company address, who the supervisor in. That is all mandatory. The project, if it's a particular project, you can fill it in. If you've developed a template for the company, right, for your organisation to use in most situations, then obviously that part there will be blank. We leave it there so you can fill it in for particular projects. The company's ABN, the company contact phone number is all mandatory information. But if you notice, we've left personnel, consultant and development unhighlighted because it's not mandatory that you show that on a safe work method statement. We think it's a good thing just to have there because it answers any questions before they get asked. I would have that information elsewhere stored away in company records otherwise. Down here, we have high risk work contained in this activity. And here are the 10 subjects that I highlighted before, high risk construction work, that are most relevant to electricians. And I've said, hey, for this job, which is pub lighting upgraded somewhere in Australia, that maybe I've got some asbestos available because it's an old super six sheeting roof. I'm probably going to be having some work near heights, and I might be working near energised electrical equipment where the supply comes onto the building with the old overhead lines. Other mandatory information, what PPE do I require? And competencies, training and qualifications. Everything else here on the page is not mandatory for a SWMS, but it's highly recommended we put it there to make it a little bit easier for people to go, tick, yes, let's consider this. Because we do understand that when your workers arrive out on site and they need to check it's still relevant for the situation, that if they run through the potential environmental impacts, whether there's other permits and those sorts of things required, they are assessing whether this SWMS is still relevant for the task that they're about to do. Risk matrix are quite common across SWMS and basic risk assessment processes and that. There is no mandatory requirement for a risk matrix. These things appear in dozens of formats. Some of them have letters, some of them have numbers. Some of them, as you add the numbers up, the bigger the number, the bigger the concern, the higher the risk, the more the worry. Yet others do it in a count down function, right? There is no standard, there's no requirement, there is no control. You can create these things to suit yourself, all right? We've developed this one over many years. We've used a count up system where 25 is the absolute worst and 1 is the lowest. We've even color coded it, and lots of them are color coded to assist, right? They are simply a tool to help you assess whether the hazards and the controls are suitable. All right? You could do away with this if you wanted. All right? It is not mandatory. Okay, but it does lead you there in the middle of the page with that hierarchy of controls, and it does highlight that PPE is the last resort. Okay. Next page of our SWMS, the highlighted information is the mandatory stuff. See, the risk assessment, the inherent and residual risk scores are not highlighted because they are not mandatory parts of a safe work method statement. But what is? The steps of the job, the hazards and worries that are there, my control methods for those hazards, and whom is responsible for monitoring this. Now, some principal contractors will accept a position title like project manager or electrical worker or supervisor, or the boss. Others won't accept position titles. They want a person's name. That is a principal contractor's matter of preference. Okay. For you, select what is appropriate to you, what you think is going to work. My concern with a person's name is that if I said it's Bob and Bob's come down with COVID-19 and I've sent Jane along to run the job, does that really make my SWMS not current or not effective? If I had just titles there, I could say, hey, Jane is the supervisor today, she's running the job, and away we go. But some principal contractors don't like that. Alrighty. Whether you decide to argue with them or cave will just come down to your decision. I'm fairly pragmatic. For me, I would get out with a pen and I would just write underneath it who that was, or I'd put it up on front. I'd find a space to write on the front page that today the supervisor is this. Okay. Now, with the templates, the SWMS templates that we build, you are not stuck with everything that we say. We do acknowledge that a sole trader will manage things differently to a company with 100 employees and, you know, all the trappings that large businesses have with plant and machinery and extra skills and knowledge. All right, modify these things to suit your business. If you are in doubt, got a question, can I do this? Is it sufficient? Contact your field support advisors. Yes, the FSAs, the old safety and technical advisors, talk to us and we will give you some guidance and ideas around that. Legislation and standards. This is not a mandatory feature of a safe work method statement. Yet, many principal contractors insist on these and can get quite pedantic around it. Okay, these have come in, we put them there, we maintain them. This is the area of the SWMS that dates so quickly and creates the biggest headaches within the SWMS themselves. But the principal contractors basically running an argument that says, well, you've said that somebody's going to use a fall arrest device. How do we know that it is an appropriate one? So they've insisted over time that maybe you put this, identify the standard for fall arrest devices. Right? This is where some of the health and safety consultants and managers who've probably got a little bit more time than they've got work will start getting in here and going, hey, this is 2011. There was an amendment that came into effect on the 1st of January 2020. Therefore, this is out of date. And they will throw them back at you. There's not much we can do about that. We review these. When we review the SWMS, we have legal registers loaded into ME Safety. We update them every, it's 4 times a year, every quarter. Right, we put them in here as much as we can, but this is not a mandatory section. If you're going to leave it there, then you will need to, from time to time, check the legislation that's mentioned here against the legal register, or check with us. In our SWMS, we have made these separate tables per jurisdiction, so that even if you are not a whiz with Word, you can click delete the table and pull them out. My suggestion is, if they are not relevant for the work that you do, if they are not relevant for the customers you have, delete this whole section. Do away with it, because if it isn't there, it can't date and it's not mandatory. If you do work for principal contractors who love this stuff, then minimize it. If you're not playing in all the states and territories, remove those that you are not playing in those markets. Keep it minimal, but be aware that before you slip them a new copy, you might want to just check to see that this is the latest version, because this is the area that changes the most. Height swims from year to year, not likely to change too much in content. The legislation absolutely guaranteed on all of the stuff shown on that page, something will change this year, even with the full lockdown and Parliament's not working terribly well. Sign-in pages. Again, this isn't highlighted because it depends on how you use this. If I was running my safe work method statements electronically, my staff were accessing them via a tablet, or I've put them into my job management software or whatever, right? They might just sign on electronically. They identify that they're using your swims for whatever it is. Good, they've signed on. You've got the evidence that they've been consulted and trained. They've said they're using it, away they go. This page exists if you're running them in paper, so that they can do the risk assessment on the front page. They can modify the swims if needed, checking with you if it's a major change, and they can sign on here to say, that's it, I'm in, I'm on. It's also very useful if you've got subcontractors and visitors who might come to site, because then you can insist they read the swims, check with them that they understand the swims, right, and that they sign on. Okay, it's not just a matter of here, sign that, good, take your tools, off you go. They must read the swims, they must understand the swims. You might have to check with yourself, form a really good opinion that they do, and then get them to sign on. So there's some choices there for you. The box down the bottom is only really relevant if you are into version control. So if you are a HSEQ triple certified company, so if you've got ISO 9000 and the other standards there, then you need document control. You need to show when things were reviewed, reassessed, maintained. If that's not what you are, if that's not what you do, you can get rid of this. We strongly recommend that you review your swims on an annual basis. If you are running even paper copies, you could just fill that in with your initials and the date each year to go, you know what, so I did create this thing back in January 2018. Here we are, the 27th of January this year, I reviewed it and go, you know what, she's still good. Or maybe I've made some slight changes to it, but essentially it is still the same. All right, but to sign or not to sign, that's a question depending on how you are running your swims. Other things to be aware of. Well, these are your documents. Own them. All right? Your principal contractors are required in their legislative obligations to verify that you have swims for relevant tasks. So they are going to ask you for them. They can question if a swims is satisfactory. If I slipped a large tier 1 construction company a height swims and it was just one page that says, hang on tight, put the harness on, tie it off onto something, good to go. That's, you know, they've got the ability and the skills to go, you know, is this satisfactory? All right. Be cautious though that if they start directing you what steps you must have in there, right? If they're doing their part right, they will throw it back and go, hey, there's not enough detail here and here, or we want to know more about how you're going to do this and this. But if they start directing you, you must have in this and put some steps, and some controls, just be aware that they might be opening up themselves to more liability if something goes wrong. Okay, so if you've got them pushing at you and you've got some issues there, give us a holler. We can give you some direction on that, but you might want to point out, that's fine, I can throw that into my swims, but you realise that because you're directing me to, you might wear a lot more responsibility if something goes wrong than you would normally. If you are using the swims and there has been an accident, right, whilst that swims is in operation, now I'm not talking about a cut finger, right? Maybe I'm using the swims for plant and a piece of that machinery hits someone and breaks their arm or runs them over. You must keep a copy of that safe work method statement for a minimum of 2 years. I personally would suggest 5 is a good one, but minimum of 2 years. The reason for this is if somebody wants to launch an action, right? It might be a regulator, it might be a civil action. You must have a copy of that swims available. And the courts are pretty good then at having a look at the swims and what people were doing. And there have been some cases where the swims wasn't terribly grand. The work had varied from the swims and the courts have gone, well, you varied from the swims. That wasn't a good thing to do. All right, so you must keep copies. In the electronic age, it's pretty easy to keep those swims. If you have scanned it and put it into storage somewhere on the net, it's probably still available. Let's say MEA review our swims templates annually. We keep versions of all previous swims locked away in the vault. So if for whatever reason you needed a copy of the swims from 2016, you could talk to us. We would have our template master swims. We wouldn't have your particular version unless you saved it back into any safety, and then it is certainly retrievable. So where do I get them? Well, we store all the MEA swims in ME Safety in a folder called Safe Work Method Statements Swims. If you don't know how to find that, that's easy enough. If you can get into ME Safety, just go onto the search bar below the Create and View tile, type SWMS, and it will even suggest to you, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to find one? Do you want to create one? Yeah, what is it you are after? If you don't know how to access ME Safety, that's fine. Call us 1300 889 198 and talk to us. If you are an MEA member, you have got access to ME Safety where we keep our swims. Now, how many are there in there? Well, all members of MEA have access to at least Express. Express is our free level of the ME Safety system. When we started ME Safety back in 2016, right, we made a decision that all members should get access to at least some very basic information to get them started, to have cover some of your legal obligations, right, and liabilities. Let's get you started on the journey. And in there, we've got 10 subjects, 15 swims. What's the difference? Well, for heights, which is a high-risk construction work activity, we've broken that we've broken that subject into 6 different swims. Are you working at heights using EWPs? Are you using scaffold, edge protection, fall arrest devices, ladders, right? So there's a number of them there. Mobile scaffold is another one. If you are subscribed to ME Safety subscription levels, be it Essential, Pro, or if you're a HSEQ certification member, we've got 27 subjects covered in there, 32 swims. Again, the difference is the way that we've broken down the height swims. And we broke the height swims up last year because it was way too generic. We had all the different methods in there. almost as one cell block to each type to say, how do we do this? Now we've broken up far more comprehensive. But that's where they are. In summary, SWMS have a legal standing. These things are required for certain tasks. They can very easily be cited into court. Coroners have a look at them, all sorts. They are built in consultation with workers. So we've created a template. We've taken a look at what is best practice around the country. We've looked at the different jurisdictions and say, hey, this state over here requires this, these over here require that, which is the better one, and we build them there and we put lots of detail in there. But it's a template. You add to or remove depending on your circumstances and situation. All right. Another one to be aware of for that is not uncommon with heights is frequently, obviously with heights, it will mention ladders. If you're going to a no ladder site, you obviously want to review your SWMS and remove that. We have had a number of height SWMS rejected over the years because people were on no ladder sites and they hadn't taken the word out of the SWMS. They must address the hazards, risks, and control steps in the task. Must be yours, not something you grabbed off the shelf. Don't race into ME Safety, grab the latest version of the SWMS for excavation and trenching, run out and go, this is good, and try and apply it. You need to adapt and adopt it for yourself, even if it is that the content is good, but you need to put your company details on the front. There will be something you need to do. It is a living document. It is going to change. It's going to change potentially on the day, on the job site, because of what is happening. I might be having a trench excavation. I've counted on being the only trade there on the day, but I get there and there is somebody delivering bricks to the construction site and they're running around with a forklift. I go, oh, hang on. If I'm going to be in this trench digging with a shovel and a forklift's running around, need to take some steps to make sure they're not going to get to me. We strongly recommend you minimize the number that you are maintaining. If you only do half a dozen of those 10 high-risk construction work tasks, then you should only have those half a dozen SWMS. Don't put time, effort, resources into maintaining SWMS that you do not need. Right? It's just going to stress you. It is a risk for you. Leave it with us. Know that we are maintaining a library there, that we're putting in the effort each year to review them, update them, modernize them, so that if you need down the track, you suddenly go, hey, I'm no longer working just in the new housing market. I'm going to do some old building maintenance. There might be asbestos. Go and get the asbestos SWMS at that point. Leave the stress and the heavy lifting on us. Minimize the SWMS you are maintaining. Where you can, minimize what is in SWMS and try and put into procedures. We've got no choice around the high-risk construction work tasks. But there are other things that you could do that instead of putting in a SWMS, you might put in a procedure. Let's say just pre-wiring, roughing in a house. I might go, you know, that's not really a highly risky task. Just don't want to get it all wrong, obviously. But I might put that into a procedure because it doesn't carry the same legal weight as a SWMS. I can sit there, I can use my trade, knowledge, experience, background and write it out and deem this is the way that it shall be done. Put it out for my staff and that's the way they do it. All right? So keep the SWMS to a minimum. If you need help, talk to your field support advisor, what used to be called the STA, Safety and Technical Advisors, still the same person, had a title change because we're doing a lot more of supporting you and coaching and the master program, advantage program, all that sort of stuff. You could email the team at mesafety@mea.asm.au or you could pick up the telephone and phone us, 1300 889 198, obviously Monday to Friday, work hours, or if you have, for the guys out and around the country, their business card, you might just phone them directly. All right, so effectively that's the presentation. We've got Q&A function. If you click, I think, on the bottom of your screen, if you've got any questions, feel free to do that. Click there, type in your question. Questions will remain anonymous to other attendees, and let's see if we can answer them for you. All right. Otherwise, you can always follow up later with an email to us and say, hey, how can I help you here? All right. If you are signing off at this point, thank you for attending. All right, please contact us if you need more information. This is the first safety-focused webinar that we've run. I am keen to run some others. If you've got particular subjects that you would like us to cover, please let us know. You can email me directly, cgibson, cgibson, at mea.asn.au. At least that way I won't get lost. You'll know who to hunt down if we don't get to it, but I am keen to run some others on things that you might find useful. Alrighty, now, have we got any questions there? No questions? I will just wait for a moment in case anyone does get a query come up. I'm sorry, I'm just checking some chats here while we're going. Oh, thank you. Oh, yes, thank you to all who've complimenting on this one. If there is no more folks, I will thank you all very much. It's been wonderful. I will endeavour to get a more involved presentation for next time. This is, I know we've slotted an hour and we've taken 48 minutes, so geez, sorry for all the extra time we're getting back. Stay well out there, stay safe out there. Remember, if there is anything that you need to know, not just on safety, on the current COVID crisis and that as well, sing out to us. We are more than willing to help. Thank you all. And there you go, there I am. Thank you very much. All the best out there, folks. Bye.